With the brand new ban list introduced around the corner for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, we'll be reviewing what these cards are and what they're going to do and potential impacts of the future for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duels. Good news for anyone who is not a fan of floodgates such as skill drain, as those are going to be banned or at least limited, which means that your opponent isn't going to be able to stall for however many turns and you're not going to be relying on a very dead-end duel. A new Forbidden limited list has been announced for Master Duel, applying from April 10th. So from the time of recording, for me that's another several days. As usual, you'll get a bonus for dismantling cards whose maximum number of allowed copies have been reduced until May the 10th, with time zones applying, so this will be relevant to wherever you are in the world. So for me, for example, they might do like a 12 o'clock UK time style of situation. It says here as part of this that there are, in terms of newly forbidden, there aren't any. Newly limited, so that means you can only have one of them, is Herald of Orange Light and Floowandereeze and the Magnificent Map. Goes and match Rivalry of Warlords and Skill Drain. Newly semi-limited, which are going to be 2 copies, are Necroface, Thunder Dragonhawk, Runic Fountain and Runic Tip. And in terms of no longer limited cards, they have Altergeist Multifaker, Soul Eating Overraptor, Spiral Quickfix, Galatea the Orcust Automaton, Divine Wind of Mist Valley, Spellbook of Judgment and Super Polarization. So the reason I think some of these cards have been limited or restricted are because they are far too frequently used within multiple types of decks. In terms of the newly limited, with Herald of Orange Light, that's used within the Divine Herald type of archetype, Herald of Perfection, the ritual decks that tend to negate absolutely everything. Herald of Orange Light negates specifically monster effects, and it's also a tuner monster, so there is a little bit of a difference between that and the Herald of Green and Purple Lights. Green Light is obviously spell cards because spells are green. The Purple Light is relevant to trap cards, but neither of those came out at I think those two came out at a different time for Herald of Orange Light. Orange Light came out in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. The other two came out around the GX seasons. Floowandereeze and the Magnificent Map, well, the obvious reason for that is Floowandereeze are able to tribute over your monsters, so they can kaiju your monsters and you're not really able to respond to that. They are acted as normal summons and there isn't really a disadvantage to using the card, so unless you have the specific spell of traps to destroy the field spell, you're not able to do anything about it. Rivalry of Warlords and Goes on Match I think are very similar. One is specific to an attribute, the other is specific to typing, and you can only have one of each. So with Goes on Match, that creates an issue because if your opponent is running a specific deck that only has a mono typing and a mono attribute, if they use any one of those two, then it can make it very difficult if you're running any variety of cards. As for example, if you've got an extra deck solution to it, you've got Baron de Fleur for example in there and you can actually summon that card. With this, unless you're running purely wind attributes, you're not going to be able to make it because you won't be able to have these synchro materials out on the field to be able to do that. Skill drain is annoying in certain decks because if your opponent has established their board, they've already got the monsters they need necessary up on the field. That is an issue as they don't care whether they don't have effects anymore because they'll have their back row cards. They'll have monsters with likely 3,000 or so attack points. I don't really need any other types of protection to them. The other thing is it can be used for like big beat stick decks such as Malefics that rely on that card. In terms of newly semi-limited, so 2 obs, Necroface, that's to do with banishing. It's really annoying dealing with banishing as those cards tend not to be able to be recovered. Your opponent tends to be able to recover their cards as they're running a Macrocosmos style of deck. It tends to be used for Gren Maju Isa and to boost that card up to 10,000 attack points. You know, you see it at this point where it just OTKs you don't have anything prepared for it and it just runs you over, steamrolls you. Thunder Dragonhawk I don't think is particularly that big of a deal. I like the fact that they're reintroducing the Thunder Dragons, and I think because Colossus is currently running at 1, it's not so big of an issue. If it had been you've got multiple of the fusion monsters, then maybe it wouldn't be so high up. Runic Fountain and Runic Tip, these 2 cards get on my nerves. I don't like the Runic archetype. For anyone who hasn't played these, they have a tendency of banishing and removing all of your cards from your deck, so you end up decking out. Runic Fountain is the irritation of this because what it does is it continues as a field spell card to recover the runic cards and the quick play spells that you've already used in the turn. That means it goes back to the top of the deck, you get to recover 3 of them, you get to then recycle them, and it's just a never-ending cycle. Until you can actually get rid of the runic fountain itself, your opponent will continue to use those effects. In terms of the no longer limited list, Altergeist Multi-Faker, Altergeist don't really do too much in Master Duel, however they can be quite irritating, as just by bouncing back the Multi-Faker you're able to negate certain effects and then they can re-bring them out and then search for other cards. It can be, if they're allowed to set up, they can be an absolute irritation. Soul Eating Oviraptor, well, that's to do with the dinosaurs and Ultimate Tyranno, and that can be quite an irritation, but you know, it's just how you're going to have to face them. You're going to have to manage how you deal with dinosaur type monsters. In terms of Spiral Quick Flicks, I'm not too familiar with the Spiral archetype, but the Spiral agents do rely on guessing the various cards you have on the top deck and then getting some sort of advantage of those. Galatea, I don't think it's going to be too big of an issue. I think no one is really playing that archetype, and with the changes and the tier elements that are coming out soon, I think it's not going to be too big of an issue. Divine Wind of Mist Valley, that's very much used for wind attribute decks, so that will be your Dragunities, your Harpy ladies, anything along those lines, and it doesn't really do much. It kind of bounces things back. Spellbook of Judgment, again, I don't think it's too relevant. It's relevant for spellcaster type decks, and it can be useful in, there's a particular type of pendulum deck that does rely on these type of cards which could benefit from Spellbook of Judgment. I think they're called mystical beasts or something like that, along those lines. That could be relevant. Super Polymerization going to 3 I think is slightly concerning, just because people are using all sorts of generic fusion monsters in their deck. Super Polymerization cannot be negated. It is basically one of those cards, one of the few cards that cannot have any interactions with any other cards. As soon as activated, nothing can happen. You just have to let whatever monster comes out be released, and then you have to deal with that monster specifically. There are cards and decks which are quite annoying for it, and there are more fusion monsters which are more generic, and means that Super Polymerization actually becomes far better than it ever used to be. So now we'll actually go into the breakdown of the specific cards so you can actually see a flavour of their card text and why they can be quite devastating. So this being Herald of Orange Light, it's a light attribute fairy type tuner monster with a level 2 and 300 attack and 500 defense. When your opponent activates a monster effect as a quick effect, you can send this card and one other fairy monster from your hand to the graveyard to negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. This can be quite devastating if you have decks that rely on monster effects to help stack up your presence on the field, or actually just help you to search out for things to then make the deck far more accurate and flow better. Floowandereeze and the Magnificent Map is the field spell. During your main phase, you can reveal one level 1 Floowandereeze monster in your hand and banish one Floowandereeze card with a different name from your deck. Then immediately after this effect resolves, normal summon the revealed monster. If your opponent normal summons a monster immediately after this effect resolves, you can normal summon one Floowandereeze monster. You can only use each effect of Floowandereeze and the Magnificent Map once per turn. This is a way of adding to the consistency of the deck, and it can be very annoying because most of their monsters are either the level 1 or the level 8 monsters, which are their boss monsters. So it just adds too much consistency, and then they're able to just normal summon too frequently. Ghost and Match is a continuous trap card. Its effect is each player can only control one attribute of monster. Send all other face-up monsters they control to the graveyard. If and when this card is flipped face-up, this stops you from doing so many plays and is a very difficult card to out. Rivalry of Warlords is a continuous trap card. Its effect is each player can only control one type of monster. Send all other face-up monsters they control to the graveyard. If you're running a deck that has multiple attributes and multiple typings, this can be near impossible to run. For example, in Attack Genus, you've got typings of Beast Warrior, you've got Warriors, you've got Spellcasters, you've got various other typings, and it's an absolute irritation to face off against. Skill Drain is a continuous trap card. Its effect is activate this card by paying 1000 life points, negate the effects of all face-up monsters while they are face-up on the field, but their effects can still be activated. This is one of those win harder based cards. It means your opponent isn't likely to use this effect until they're in a position where they have so much advantage over you that by flipping this over, it basically wins them the game. Necroface is a dark attribute zombie type level 4 with 1200 attack and 1800 defense. The effect is if this card is normal summoned, shuffle all banned banished cards into the deck, this card gains 100 attack for each card shuffled into the main deck by this effect. If this card is banished, each player banishes 5 cards from the top of their deck or their entire deck if less than 5. So this has a couple of effects. Really, the top bit of the effect isn't the one that's relevant. It happens to shuffle all banished cards back into the deck, but in all likelihood you're not going to be running that unless you really want to reset the cards that you've already had banished. And even when it does this, it gains 100 attack times the number of cards that have been shuffled back into the main deck for the effect. That's not really that useful. The 100 attack boost is just a little bit of an icing on the cake. It's when it's banished. To be able to just banish 5 cards from both players' deck means it's going to disrupt your opponent, and you'll have set your deck in a way that you can just recover those cards. Thunder Dragon Hawk is a light attribute Thunder type level 6 with 1800 attack and 2200 defense. The effect is you can discard this card to special summon one of your Thunder Dragon monsters that is banished or in your graveyard, except Thunder Dragon Hawk. If this card is banished or sent from the field to the graveyard, you can shuffle any number of cards from your hand into the deck, then draw the same number of cards. You can only use one Thunder Dragon Hawk effect per turn and only once that turn. The purpose of this card is simply by discarding it, you're able to just revive any of the Thunder Dragon monsters, and that can even be the fusion monsters if they've been banished or sent to the graveyard, so it does have that reoccurrence to it. The alternative effect, if this happens to be banished or sent from the field to the graveyard, being able to shuffle your cards back from the hand into the deck and then redraw those cards without any loss to you is too much advantage. You may completely reset what you need, and that can be quite dangerous. It's a bit like having a magical mallet without any cost. Runic Fountain is a field spell card. You can activate Runic Quick Play spell cards from your hand during your opponent's turn. Once per turn, if you activate a Runic Quick Play spell card, you can target up to 3 Runic Quick Play spells in your graveyard, place them on the bottom of your deck in any order, then draw the same number of cards. See, this is what I mean when I say this particular card is very irritating within that archetype. Not only are you able to activate Quick Play spell cards from your hand during your opponent's turn, which is, by the way, irritating enough, as you can't deal with those cards unless you are constantly able to rip those cards from your opponent's hand. They're still going to be able to recover those cards, and they get sent back into the deck, and then you get to redraw those cards. So you're constantly in the cycle of, unless you get rid of this card, you can't beat the Runic player. Runic Tip is a quick play spell card. The effect is activate one of these effects, but skip your next battle phase after activation. Add one Runic card from your deck to your hand, except Runic Tip, then banish the top card of your opponent's deck, or special summon one Runic monster from your extra deck to the extra monster zone. You can only activate one Runic Tip per turn. This card can be used to search for the field spell itself, which is the Runic Fountain, so that's where the issue comes, as well as, you know, being able to just special summon the extra deck monsters. There's a couple of them. There's one that boosts your life points, there's one that prevents your card from being destroyed by returning itself back to the extra deck. Altergeist Multifaker is a dark attribute spellcaster type level 3 with 1200 attack and 800 defense. The effect is if you activate a trap card except during a damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is special summoned, you can special summon one Altergeist monster from your deck in defense position, except Altergeist Multifaker. You cannot special summon monsters the turn you activate this effect, except Altergeist monsters. You can only use each effect of Altergeist Multifaker once per turn. This card can be quite irritating to face off against because it's constantly being able to return itself and to search for more Altergeist monsters actually from the deck, which makes it quite dangerous. The trap cards that you're able to constantly go through also make it quite difficult to actually defeat this deck. Soul Eating Oviraptor is a dark attribute dinosaur type level 4 with 1800 attack and 500 defense. Its effect is if this card is normal or special summoned, you can take one dinosaur monster from your deck and either add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard. You can target one other level 4 or lower dinosaur monster on the field, destroy it, then special summon one dinosaur monster from your graveyard in defense position. You can only use each effect of Soul Eating Oviraptor once per turn. This card is used to set up a lot of the plays for the dinosaur typings, so as soon as it's summoned, you're just able to take a dinosaur monster and either have it in your hand, so it can be any level, that's what's dangerous about it, or you can send it to the graveyard, so actually if it's got a graveyard based effect, that's also useful. And then you're able to also, with its secondary ability, destroy one of your dinosaur monsters and special summon a dinosaur from the graveyard. It does have to be in defense position, so it cannot really go into attack for that turn, but there are a few dinosaur type monsters that actually gain effects from being destroyed, so you're not losing anything by destroying those cards with this card's effect. Spiral Quick Fix is an earth attribute machine type effect monster level 1 with 500 attack and 400 defense. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can add 1 Spiral Gear card from your deck to your hand. If this card is in your graveyard and you control Spiral Super Agent, you can discard 1 card, special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. The purpose of this is it's just able to help search for your Spiral Gear cards, so there must be an issue to do with that. I think there's some type of looping effect that happens, and it also is able to reoccur itself just by discarding an additional card. Galatea the August Automaton is a Dark Attribute Machine type link monster with a link points on the bottom left and top right. 1800 attack points, and it requires 2 effect monsters including an Orcus monster. This link card cannot be destroyed by battle. You can target one of your banished machine monsters, shuffle it into the deck, then you can set 1 Orcus spell or trap card directly from your deck. You can only use this effect of Galatea the August Automaton once per turn. The concern about this card is it's able to just continue recovering your banished machine monsters and being able to search for Orcus spell and trap cards straight from the deck. So if those have specific effects and interrupt your opponent in any sort of way, that's where the concerns have been. Divine Wind of Mist Valley is a field spell. Once per turn, if a wind monster you control returns to the hand except during the damage step, you can special summon 1 level 4 or lower wind monster from your deck. This is very useful within the Harpy Ladies because there is a couple of cards that can actually do this. I think Harpy Conductor is an example, and in doing that you're able to just constantly special summon monsters from the deck and to have far more field presence and advantage. Spellbook of Judgment is a quick play spell card. Its effect is during the end phase of the turn this card was activated, add 1 spellbook cards from your deck to your hand except Spellbook of Judgment up to the number of spell cards activated after this card's resolution. Then you can special summon from your deck 1 spellcaster type monster whose level is less than or equal to the number of cards added to your hand by this effect. You can only activate 1 Spellbook of Judgment per turn. The problem with this card is that in this type of decks you are running multiple spellbook cards, and those provide advantages typically to generic spellcaster type monsters. It's not an archetype based effect. So long as it's standardized for the typing, this allows you to then draw into additional cards as well as summon a monster that happens to have those types of effects. I know it's during the end phase, so you're not getting the immediate effect, and that's why I think it's gone to 3, but again with Mythical Beasts it will become a big issue in the future. And this card is Super Polymerization. It's a quick play spell card with the effect discard 1 card, fusion summon 1 fusion monster from your etch deck, using monsters from either field as fusion material. Neither player can activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. The concern I have with this card is that it simply cannot be responded to. By having it at 3, I think it's a bit extreme. I don't think it's a good idea on their part. It's a decision they're probably going to have to reverse maybe after the next ban list, but we'll have to wait and see how and where that happens. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the ban list. I think they should have limited the runic cards, but I think because they've only just been recently introduced, they don't want to go too hard too quickly on those. I would like to see in the future some other options being put in place. Maybe I just don't. The only one thing I wasn't too much in agreement with is Super Polymerization. I think keeping it at 2 is where it should be. But if you guys disagree, or if you wanted any other cards to be on the limited and forbidden list, put those in the comments down below, and make sure to watch a video in the end screen or on the channel. It really helps to support it. Thank you.